Hello, everybody. This is Greg Forster, and I am beaming to you through the airwaves from the all-new global headquarters of Karam Fellowship here in Savannah, Georgia, our new digs. And I'm joined for this member spotlight interview by Jessie Swigart of Covenant Theological Seminary. Jessie, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
I want to begin by asking you, what's life-giving for you as an educator?
And for me, one of the most life-giving things for me as an educator is collaboration. The enjoyment that I get with my fellow educators and fellow practitioners in this community of practice, and and also with the students. And so I think for me as an educator, when it's me with another person or other people, and we are asking questions and we are exchanging ideas and we are exchanging experiences, and those build upon one another and morph into something new. And so for me as an educator, I think it is so much more life-giving when I can share what I'm experiencing in the classroom or experiencing on Zoom or experiencing whatever kind of mode I'm engaging my students in, that I can actually share about that with my colleagues.
Yeah, and it's really important to be intentional about creating opportunities to gather because time pressures are getting harder. All kinds of things are conspiring against those free form get-togethers where colleagues just share what's going on. So we really have to be intentional about that. Has that been your
Mhm.
experience?
Yes, absolutely. And I think I just in my career up to mid-career now, I've noticed a shift. So one of my favorite things about Covenant is that it does a lot of team teaching and cross-departmental team teaching. And so systematics and world mission and biblical studies and educational ministries working together and team teaching classes with one another. But we have experienced as different pressures, financial, time, as all of those things press against our work, the temptation to divide and conquer takes away some of those naturally occurring times when you might collaborate, when you're actually working on building something together that you then get to implement together.
There's that factory line division of labor mentality that often works against doing better academic work because collaboration is central to that. I teach the class for future academics, people who are going to go on to PhDs and be in academia. And I
Mhm.
bring in as many of my colleagues as possible to be guests in that class and just get multiple perspectives on what it's like to be a Christian academic. And that's been one of the most fun things I've done.
Yes, yeah. I mean, yeah, bringing guest speakers into classes, that is a lot of fun. I actually did a little bit of reading this summer on how to do that better, how to do guest speaking and best guest lecturing better. And some of the ideas I read about, I love this is, well, bring people in to speak, but more than bringing them in to speak, bring them in to participate. Uh, break students into groups and have that guest as an advisor for each of those groups as they try to work a real life problem solving. Do a friendly debate with that person where students actually get to see that kind of collaboration and that exchanging of ideas in real time.
That's fascinating. I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a particular resource you'd recommend for that?
I can I'm not able to name it off the top of my head, but I can send it to you.
If you send it to me, I'll include the link when we post this interview. So, bleed, insert resource here. My next question is, what are one or two challenges that you see coming down the pike for us, and how can we get ready?
Yeah, and this is related to what I said about so much enjoying collaboration. So, we are all experiencing the disruption that online education has brought to education and theological education. And and in my context, like that's in probably other contexts, the online education, all of the associated hybrid models brings with it students are thinking about whether they want to move to a location to study differently. And their whole communities are thinking of that differently. The churches they work for, if they work for a church, are thinking of that differently. Their families, all of those things. And so as that equation is different and as people are considering things, there's also a reticence about, okay, do I actually need to leave or put on pause my current vocations to go do the vocation of being a student at a seminary or a divinity school? Now, fortunately, we found that so much spiritual and ministry formation can happen in the online context. One thing I am wondering about is like, but how do we continue to preserve the community of practice that we as educators and administrators and practitioners share together as online education and more fewer people coming to study in residence as part of our world. Um, so I like to say online and residential education it's a both and, not an either or. That we should have an abundance mindset rather than a scarcity mindset, that they don't have to be working against each other. But with that, I do have a concern that if online education becomes more, are we preserving the community of the people who are working to produce that together? And how do we do that? Because if we really do teach from who we are, as Parker Palmer says, as we see in scripture, like Paul teaches as Paul, Peter teaches as Peter. And if we really are formed by the communities that we are in, how are we maintaining that community as people who may be in different places? And there's not as much of a center of gravity in that location where administrators and faculty members are running into each other in the hallways and yeah, and even breaking down some of those silos that sometimes we fall into even when we're together.
Right. Collaboration becomes much more difficult when we're not in the same place. I've found that in my class where it's more difficult. It's not impossible, but it's more difficult to have a large number of colleagues come in as guests in an online class as opposed to in an in-person class. And it's also the interaction is not quite as seamless. I've often
Right.
wondered whether high quality online education doesn't depend on the existence of the in-person school. There may be ways of creating a community of educators who are just doing online, but that would be something we'd be building from scratch without a model. I don't know what you think.
No, I think that is true. I think that is true that, and when I talk about when I try to frame it as an abundance mindset, online education needs, um, I think, uh, people in residence together, who are learning from one another. Now, that's not to say that there are people who aren't in residence who are also participating, but again, it takes that intentionality that people who are teaching online, whether they're in the same city or whether that they are in a different city, uh, they want to be part of that teaching community. Most good educators do. They want to be part of a community with other good educators. And so, how are we as educational leaders cultivating that space? But it's hard, because faculty are busy. and they have all these students, and they have their research that they need to do. And but now I think a a thing that's maybe taking up intentional space that maybe wasn't as such an intentional space before, happened more naturally, is faculty members need to be thinking about, how am I cultivating uh, a collegial relationship and collaboration, not with just the people who are on my hallway, but the people who are participating in this program who don't even live in my same city.
And I think that's especially true as new generations of academics enter and they don't take for granted the traditional forms of academic life. Just my personal observation is the more new people come in, the more intentional they are about needing and cultivating that kind of collaborative space. Well, I feel like we've already broached the third question, so let's just keep it rolling. I'll toss the third question in. We can continue. What's something you'd like to see happen next in theological education?
So as yeah, to keep the ball rolling on that, I do think there needs to be um, more models and more exploration of models that are very much valuing the interdisciplinary, and I say, and even intermodal um, collaboration between colleagues who are thinking about, okay, how do we do what we do well together? And so I think that, I mean, that's going to require buy-in from boards and faculty and administrators. And I think an even prioritization in budget construction, that this kind of generativity that is required is going to it's going to require some resources, and
Right.
we need a broader system for that to be a priority.
We cannot cut our way to glory. And
No, yeah,
it's funny because in other sectors this is recognized. You know that if you just come in and make austerity cuts, that might relieve an immediate budget crunch, but it's not going to equip the organization for long-term success. Yet very often we see theological schools facing their budget crunches with a pure austerity mindset. And that's not to say that cuts may not be needed in a budget crisis, but at some point there has to be investment in something that makes the educational experience worth having.
yes. Yes, no, I agree. And even, in thinking as in theological education, how do we not only work inter-institutionally, but intra-institutionally?
Right. You know, a while back we had a one of our annual faculty retreats, and the theme of that retreat was how do I talk to my dean? And that was an interesting way of framing it. But we've always struggled to figure out the right way to have these conversations in our institutions.
Yes, yes.
I think that's getting harder rather than easier at the moment, but perhaps that'll push us toward breaking out of old models more easily.
Yeah, I think so. And I do think like there does I think there have other been like Karam forum discussions about the faculty administrator slash. And I do think in the future that we cannot afford the faculty and administrative silos. That there's no energy to spare for there to not be collaboration and a good working relationship there.
We really need a fresh vision for shared governance. Jessie, thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Greg. I'm really glad to have this conversation.